The Democratic and Republican Colorado State Assemblies took place this past Saturday with a major upset in the GOP governor's race. Walker Stapleton and Greg Lopez both secured a spot on the GOP ballot, but Cynthia Kaufman's campaign came to an end by only securing 5% of the vote. On the Democratic side, candidates Kerry Kennedy and Jared Polis officially qualified for the ballot, with Kennedy winning over 60% of the vote. Now, we're going to do 2 rounds on this one. Let's start with the GOP race. Patty, I'm going to go ahead and say I was out there. I did not have Greg Lopez anywhere near making the ballot. I had him in the group of also rans the clown car, and lo and behold, he takes a spot that I think a lot of people, a few months ago at least, would have thought would have been Cynthia Kaufman's race against Walker Stapleton. And we have breaking news on Friday morning as we're taping here at noon. Doug Robinson failed to make the ballot. So now we have officially a 3-way gubernatorial GOP primary: Walker Stapleton, Victor Mitchell, and Greg Lopez. I did not have that in the pool a few months ago. Patty?
Well, David Kopel, who is not here today, probably at the 420 rally, mocked me last week for saying that it was going to be wild. Well, it was wild and wacky. I mean, Greg Lopez shows he's the Darrell Glenn of this assembly. If you get up, make a speech, have your wife, who you'd been hauled into court because of a domestic violence beef years before, if she makes a great speech, you make a great speech, you can get on the ballot. The shocker really was that Cynthia Kaufman did so badly that she took off after Walker Stapleton, which was interesting, and I guess that was only fair given what Doug Bruce had done to her, you know, saying, how can we have someone who isn't married and has never had children? We assume Doug. Well, what?
Does Doug Bruce have children?
No. Well, we're hoping
point.
Doug Bruce does not have children, but that he, I mean, to take an attack like that against a major candidate, a statewide official, the Attorney General, and to say she can't be a candidate because she doesn't have children. You know, what year is this? 1775? I mean, that a woman can't be in a position. So that was horrifying. She didn't do a great job, though, as a speech. She probably should have had Greg Lopez's wife speak for her. And that Walker Stapleton did the only thing he could do by pulling his petitions, but did a pretty good job of rallying the troops, and he's going to be hard to beat on the Republican side.
Michael, I'm just going to throw it to you first. It's probably a question we'll be answering in a couple different ways, but help me understand the implosion that was the Cynthia Kaufman campaign. When she first announced, it looked like she was going to be maybe not a front runner, but at least a pretty formidable candidate, and that seemed to be the apex of her campaign. It only went south from there. Help me understand it.
I think it's hard to understate how big of an implosion that it was. I was at the assembly 4 years ago, and her campaign color was blue, and blue was everywhere. People had hats and shirts. You would think she was a rock star at the time. And I can't remember a politician in Colorado falling so quickly within a party without some huge scandal. And really, I think that people just felt that she wasn't conservative enough as AG. There were several issues that she just didn't stand up for conservatives on. She ran a really bad campaign. But 5%, I think, was lower than anybody expected. And I think it didn't help her that she gave a speech ripping Walker Stapleton right out of the gate, got booed, and I think that lowered her probably another 10% or so. Greg Lopez had a good speech, but he was somebody who I expected to do pretty well, not quite that well, but that's just by talking to grassroots people, that he's been around the state, that he's been talking to people and getting some support. But Walker Stapleton's the big story, that he can get in 4 days before the assembly, can get basically conservatives to come out. Tom Tancredo, Ken Buck, Patrick Neville came out and said this is the conservative who has the best shot of winning. And so I think he's the clear front runner with only 3 candidates left with Doug Robinson out. I'm sure he'll challenge that through the court, but I think Walker Stapleton's the clear front runner.
Eric, at one point, I think, and one of the reasons we had clown car comments for both Democrats and the Republicans, but the clown car on the Republican side was far more crowded. I think at one point there was 9 candidates, and we're now down to 11. Okay, 11. Thank you, Susan. So we're now down to 3, but I've been covering politics with all of us for a long time. I would not have had that 3 as the final 3. Were they in your pool?
No, they would not have been my final 3. And think of who else is not in the race at this point. George Brockler looked like a Republican frontrunner way back when gone. Tom Tancredo, gone. Now Cynthia Kaufman, gone, and almost embarrassingly gone. I spent the day last Saturday, I spent the morning at the Democratic Convention in Broomfield, drove up the road, spent the afternoon at the Republican Convention in Boulder. my main takeaway is we talk all around this table and in all other circles about the political divide in this state and this country and how these parties continue to drift further and further apart. The cultural divide is as pronounced as the political divide. You could take the 4,000 people in Broomfield, the Democrats, the 4,000 Republicans in Boulder, line them up at a parking lot, and walk down and identify with 98% accuracy, I'm convinced, who came out of which convention. The cultural difference is just stunning. Cynthia Kaufman, I mean, I agree with Michael's point. She has underperformed. I think she's somewhat underperformed as Attorney General, but as a politician, she has underperformed almost as badly as anyone I can remember who had promise, who had potential. This was a vote against her as much as it was a vote for Walker Stapleton, and particularly the vote for all those other candidates not named Stapleton was largely a vote against Cynthia Kaufman. It was palpable, and you could feel it. You could feel it on the convention floor. Lastly, Walker Stapleton, at least so far, is a pretty lucky politician, and luck has a role in politics of everyone who is out of the race. And I would even submit that the problem with his petitions, well, it didn't seem lucky at the time. I think it will go down as a lucky break. It forced him to do this. It helped keep other candidates who would have gotten onto the ballot, because that 100% of the delegate vote would have had to get split up somewhere. It kept them off the ballot. I mean, it's still going to be a rough November for whoever the Republican is, just given the tenor of the year. But this is set up for Stapleton to be the nominee and maybe not to break a sweat in the process.
Susan, what's the bigger headline, Cynthia Kaufman's implosion or Greg Lopez's ascension?
Cynthia Kaufman's implosion. You know, I mean, on paper at least, and let me just say I'm no fan of Cynthia Kaufman's, but on paper, she was, of all of those Republicans, the one that actually probably had the best shot statewide. I mean, she's a purportedly pro-choice Republican. I think what hurt her largely is that this is a woman who said nothing about her position on choice for years and years in politics and suddenly became pro-choice, you know, which I think largely killed her, not necessarily, I mean, partly because the base obviously does not embrace choice, but also I think there's an integrity issue there. People are just kind of wondering, like, where have you been, Cynthia, and where do you stand on things? And this is a woman who has not answered basic questions about her position on all manner of topics in the state, and has conducted herself in the Attorney General's office as an island. I mean, she has a fortress around her. She does not speak to the press. She doesn't speak to the public. She doesn't play well in the sandbox with others. And what you felt palpably at that Republican assembly was that people don't like her. And she's no longer tied to the congressman. She's not married to him anymore. So, you know, I'm sorry to say these things about her, but she did not emerge as her own candidate or her own person in that party.
No, 5% of the vote backs it up. Let's do a quick second round of this to the Democratic side of the thing, of the ballot. We knew Kerry Kennedy and Jared Polis were probably going to get a spot in the ballot. Neither one of them had enough firepower to eliminate them from the ballot. But over 60% for Kerry Kennedy was a strong showing. Patty, is this significant momentum heading into the June 26th primary?
Well, she definitely has been done so much better as Cynthia Kaufman's falling down. Good year for a woman, but Kerry has handled her campaign ever since that goofy announcement when she was driving the car and talking and maybe running over little children. She's done a really good job with her campaign, and she's caught fire. And if she continues to march that way, she has a good shot at beating Polis. It's still going to be tough. He's got a lot of money. He's got a very strong percentage of people who will vote for him no matter what. But she is doing very well. Then, of course, we would have a Walker-Stapleton, Kerry Kennedy rematch. And that would show just how different politics have been since they last met up.
That's a good point. I forgot about the rematch point. Michael, you have Jared Polis has been saying that his wallet can buy the campaign, but Kennedy's come with a lot of momentum with the grassroots part of the party who you need to knock on the doors and to make the phone calls. How significant is that?
I think it's very significant. Grassroots support, you know, is at least comparable to money. And I think, the worst thing that can happen to Jared Polis right now is that this becomes a two-person race, which it has. That he kind of wanted, split between Donna Lynn and Mike Johnston and then Kerry Kennedy. But she did what she needed to do at the Assembly, has a lot of support there. But Jared Polis did what he needed to do too. And he'll, has a big pocketbook, and I think he'll spend as much as it takes to do that. So I think it's a two-person race. It's going to be close. But I think, Donna Lynn and Mike Johnston are kind of in Victor Mitchell territory where they'll spend a ton of money and probably get nowhere. So I'm sticking with my same prediction from earlier this year on the show that says Walker Stapleton and Jared Polis will still be the nominees.
Eric, what do you think? You were there, so I want to see what did you feel from the Assembly as the momentum, or at least the general feel from the party faithful for both Polis and Kennedy?
Oh, it was definitely a Kerry Kennedy moment. There's no doubt about it. There's not a long track record in this state, and you can go back 40 years, where that top-line designation and being the favorite on the floor of an assembly necessarily translates into success at the primary ballot. There's many cases or more where that didn't work out as where it did, but you have the feeling that maybe something is different this year. Kerry Kennedy picked a strategy, picked a course. I'm going to be the favorite of the party regulars. I'm going through this process. I'm going to own the process. And she executed very, very well. She will go up now against a money machine. I will differ a little. I think Mike Johnston is still to be heard from. I think he is definitely lagging here. And I think he's got to figure out a way not just to get traction, but to get traction pretty quickly, to get back into the conversation. But he has a pocketbook, and that pocketbook, it's a little different than I think Victor Mitchell's self-funding pocketbook. So I think there's still some potential for Johnston to be heard from. But Polis has got the bigger pocketbook. It is largely a three-person race. Donna Lynn is not a clown car candidate by any standard. She's a very credible person, but she's never figured out her ticket in this particular contest. This is going to be the more interesting primary of the two.
Susan, what do you make between at least the top tier part of the ballot on the Democratic side that we're seeing the fight? We have more spirited support from party regulars, and you have a whole lot of money and some different stances that Polis has taken. Who has the edge right now?
I agree with Mike that the money is quite equal, or let's put it the other way, grassroots support is quite equal to money. And Jared has a bit of a liability here because he needs to be in Washington in Congress. He has this other job, and so he cannot make it to a lot of events around the state. Kerry can campaign full-time. I agree with Patty that she had a bit of a disastrous start with that campaign launch video when she was driving, but you see a candidate here really finding her voice. She's becoming more comfortable on the stump. She's becoming more open, which matters, really. And I think the people who know her one-on-one feel very great about Kerry. It's this question of, if you don't know her, number one, do you have a chance to meet her? And yes, she can meet a lot more people than Jared can because she's not in Congress. And number two, she's softening up. I'm interested in what you said about the rematch between Stapleton and Kerry, should that happen, because this is a very different political year. I mean, that was a year when Republicans just swept the country, and we are not in that time anymore. And Kerry and Jared and, Johnston and Lynn all have that advantage.